Order. Order. Questions to the Secretary of State for Scotland, Paul Masterton.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, as this is the last Scottish Questions ahead of the 30th anniversary of the bombing of Flight 103 Pan Am over Lockerbie in 1988, I think it would be appropriate to place on record what I'm sure all members of the House will feel at the time, with their thoughts and prayers with the families and friends of the 270 people who perished and every other person whose lives have been affected by the events of that night. Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 1 and 4 together. The UK Government is fully committed to the Sewell Convention and the related practices and procedures for seeking legislative consent.
Masterton.
Mr. Speaker, I associate myself with the Secretary of State's comments. The Healthcare International Arrangements Bill is vital for my constituents in ensuring continuity of healthcare in the European Union and for the 200,000 expats living in the EU. Will he do everything he can to urge the Scottish Government not to continue to play political games and to grant an LCM to this vital piece of legislation?
It was indeed, Mr. Speaker, extremely disappointing that the Scottish Government announced that it would not grant LCMs in relation to a number of bills without even seeing the details of those bills. The healthcare bill is an important one for Scots living abroad, and it would be totally unacceptable to put their treatment at risk. So I hope that the comments that Mr. Mike Russell made the other day are an indication that perhaps they will not proceed with this politicking approach.
David Ukit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Fisheries Bill is one of the bills my right honourable friend has just referred to. It lays the groundwork for the revival of the fishing in Banffybuck and all along Scotland's coastline. And what's more, it confers new powers on the Scottish Government. I know the SNP's policy is to take us back into the CFP, but does my right honourable friend agree with me that they should show at least some respect for coastal Scotland by working constructively with and supporting an LCM for the Fisheries Bill in Holyrood?
Mr. Speaker, I think recent events demonstrate that there are no limits to what legislation or whose interests the SNP will play politics with. Both the Agriculture and the Fisheries Bill, as my honourable friend states, are important pieces of legislation for Scotland and ones with which the Scottish Government should be fully engaged.
Mr. Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's beginning to sound like this government is only committed to the Sewell Convention when it suits it. Is it not the case that its experience of blatant disregard for the decisions and opinions of the Scottish Parliament throughout the Brexit process shows that this government, this Secretary of State, is committed to undermining the devolution settlement, and that's only going to be exacerbated when the Scottish Parliament votes against the Brexit withdrawal agreement?
Mr. Speaker, what the honourable gentleman and his friends don't like about the Sewell Convention is that it is a convention of this United Kingdom Parliament. It is part of Scotland being part of the United Kingdom, and that is something that they continue to oppose.
Mr. Peter Grant.
Speaker, 2 of his own loyal backbenchers have specifically asked him what discussions he's had with the Scottish Government, and he's refused to answer. I would take it from that he said no such discussions, and he has no intention of having further discussions with the elected Government of Scotland.
I'm afraid that is not the correct interpretation. As the honourable gentleman and his friends, since they ask about it repeatedly, know that I engage fully in the Joint Ministerial Council for European negotiations, and there are extensive discussions about these issues, about framework agreements in that forum and in many others.
Mr. Douglas Chapman.
To you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 2, 3, 8, 11 and 13 together. I have regular meetings with my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and colleagues. The deal is a deal for all parts of the UK and will protect job security and the integrity of our United Kingdom.
Mr. Speaker. I see that the Prime Minister is in Glasgow today talking about Brexit and exports. Does the Secretary of State for Scotland recognise the disruption and delays expected at UK ports as a result of the withdrawal agreement, which necessitates a development of Scottish ports as an alternative route for Scottish exporters? If he is pledging support to the Prime Minister for a poor deal for Scotland, will he also support the Rosyth-Zeebrugge ferry, which would actually help our exporters get their goods to market?
Well, I would certainly be happy, Mr. Speaker, to discuss the specific issue of the Rosyth-Zeebrugge ferry with the honourable gentleman. But if he and his colleagues don't want to see disruption at ports and elsewhere, then they shouldn't, on the 11th of December, be voting for a no-deal Brexit.
MacDonald.
The Chancellor confirmed that every single Brexit scenario will leave the economy worse off and could be justified only by what he described as political benefits. Given Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU, surely the Secretary of State must now acknowledge that there are no political benefits, no economic benefits, and that Brexit would be an all-round disaster for Scotland.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take lessons from the honourable gentleman on taking action to damage the Scottish economy. The position of the SNP is to take Scotland out of its biggest market, the United Kingdom market, and leave everyone in Scotland poorer.
Deirdre Brock.
Speaker, let me be absolutely clear. As we leave the EU, we need complete control over UK fishing. Hashtag non-negotiable at Scott Tory. So said one of the Secretary of State's Scottish Tory colleagues. Can the Secretary of State credibly tell Scottish fishing communities that the Prime Minister's deal meets those terms?
I absolutely can, and that's why I'm signing today the Scottish Fishermen's Federation pledge on delivering a Brexit for the fishing industry. And I look forward to the 35 SNP MPs who say they stand up for Scotland's fishermen doing likewise.
Martin Doherty Hugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It struck me this week the juxtaposition of the festive season with the Brexit negotiations could help the Secretary of State kill two proverbial birds with one stone. Because it comes to the House's attention via the Glasgow Herald that his good friend and the former chair of the Scottish Tory Party is to be summoned imminently to give evidence to the DCMS committee regarding his dodgy donations during the Brexit referendum. Therefore, as a parsimonious chap, I was therefore wondering for the Secretary of State was going to save some money on postage and deliver his Christmas card to his former friend Mr Cook in person in the Westminster.
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, that question is even too convoluted for these purposes. It is a matter for committees. It is a matter for committees of this House who they take evidence from.
Malcolm MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Scottish Government produced analysis of the Prime Minister's deal that suggests it will make all of us poorer based on the withdrawal agreement we're asked to vote on. But the interim Scottish Conservative leader immediately dismissed it as an excuse for another referendum, even though the Chancellor said today that it will make us poorer. So who of the two are right?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the honourable gentleman didn't wish to mislead the House, but the analysis produced by the Scottish Government is not an analysis of the deal that the Prime Minister has negotiated. What it is a rehashed version of a document that was produced in January that looks only at generic issues. The analysis this Government, which will be producing, will be focused on the deal that has actually been negotiated.
Stephen Kerr.
Mr. Speaker, leaving the most successful union in history after 311 years would bring economic chaos to Scotland. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the effect of Scotland leaving the UK is much worse than the effect of Scotland leaving in any scenario in terms of Brexit?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. As we've spoken about many times in this chamber, Scotland trades 4 times as much with the rest of the UK as it does with the EU. But I'm sure people in Scotland are starting to ask why the SNP are so keen on delivering a no-deal Brexit. And, Mr Speaker, it's because they see that that is the ideal backdrop for an independence referendum debate.
Kirsten Hare.
Mr Speaker, Nicola Sturgeon wants to drag Scotland into constitutional chaos by having a further 2 referendums against the will of the Scottish people. Will my right honourable friend join me in condemning the First Minister's stance?
I absolutely condemn Nicola Sturgeon's desire to create division and chaos and uncertainty. All along, she could have joined with the Prime Minister, worked with the UK Government to get a deal for Scotland and the UK, but she chose to put her own interests and an independence referendum first.
Clark.
Secretary of State joined me in welcoming the BP Clay Ridge project started up in November. An estimated 640 billion barrels of oil. Does he agree this is clear evidence of confidence in the Scottish economy as we leave the EU?
Mr Speaker, in his time in the House, my honourable friend has established himself as a champion of the oil and gas industry, and indeed that news is very welcome, and it demonstrates BP's continuing confidence in our UK Government approach to the oil and gas sector.
Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that from the off our Prime Minister's #1 priority has been the protection of our economy, the national interest and the protection of our UK internal market, in complete contrast to the Scottish National Party, who only sow division and would go out of their way to destroy that internal market, which is of prime importance to Scottish business?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. The distinction between the leaders of the various parties is very clear. The Leader of the Opposition is focused on a general election. The Leader of the Scottish National Party is focused on an independence referendum, and Theresa May is focused on the national interest of this country.
Pete Wishart.
I don't know if the Secretary of State realises how ridiculous he's looked with his resignation, non-resignation business. He's like a demented Grand Old Duke of York. He's led his merry band, the Scotch Tories, halfway up Resignation Hill, and he's forgot whether he's going up or down. Now, Scotland voted overwhelmingly against Brexit. Increasingly, numbers of Scots don't want anything to do with it. If he can't represent the people of Scotland, will he just resign and get out of the way, for goodness sake?
Well, Mr Speaker, I suppose there is no greater expert in this House on being ridiculous than the honourable gentleman swinging one way and another on every issue of the day. I'm quite clear. The United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, and this government will deliver that.
4 front-bench supplementaries, and we're pressed for time, so they need to be brief. Tommy Shepherd.
We could not support any deal which leads to Northern Ireland having a different relationship with the European Union than the rest of the UK. The words of the Secretary of State for Scotland. I put it to him that the backstop provides exactly that in the withdrawal agreement. Given that, how can he justify remaining in the Cabinet?
Mr Speaker, because of course the honourable gentleman selectively quotes from what I said, because I acknowledge that there were already significant differences between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom, not least because of the Belfast Agreement and in relation to, for example, the single electricity market. But I'm clear that the greatest threat to the integrity of the United Kingdom is the honourable gentleman, his colleagues, and that's why they want a no-deal Brexit.
Mr Speaker, given the gravity of the situation, I think we should expect Ministers of the Crown to answer questions put to him. He has publicly refuted the differentiation on which this withdrawal agreement is based. He has threatened to resign on numerous occasions, and now he has nailed his colours to the Prime Minister's mast and invested what political capital he has left in this deal. So I ask him this. If this withdrawal agreement is rejected by this Parliament, as it surely will be, at that point, will he resign his position?
Mr. Speaker, my position is quite clear. The integrity of the United Kingdom must be preserved. The SNP and Nicola Sturgeon see Brexit as an opportunity to break up the United Kingdom. So, above all else, I put that first.
Mr. Speaker, if I can just start by supporting the comments made by the honourable gentleman in relation to Lockerbie. Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State drew red lines for his support of the Brexit deal on the integrity of the UK and on fishing. Unless those things were protected, he would resign. The Prime Minister has come back with a deal that creates a border in the Irish Sea and sells out Scottish fishermen. So can I ask what the honourable gentleman is still doing at the dispatch box?
What I'm doing is standing up for the integrity of the United Kingdom. And when I see Jeremy Corbyn and Nicola Sturgeon caballing about what they are going to do next, and no doubt agreeing that the keys of 10 Downing Street will be handed over to Labour for another independence referendum, I know I'm doing the right thing.
Well, one respect in which the Right Honourable Gentleman is not doing the right thing is referring to members of this House by name. And the Right Honourable Gentleman knows better than that. And I hope he'll improve his performance. Leslie Laird.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the honourable gentleman knows my views, but judging by the looks of the faces of those sitting beside him, I don't think he's quite got the mood of the room. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that the Secretary of State's so-called red lines were written in invisible ink. They disappeared when the Prime Minister came back from Brussels. Labour will vote against the Prime Minister's deal. It's a bad deal for Scotland and it's a bad deal for working people. The Commons could unite behind Labour's alternative, a comprehensive and permanent customs union with a British say in future trade deals and a strong single market relationship to support British business. It's clear this deal cannot command the support of the Commons. If the Secretary of State now thinks this deal is the best deal for the country, why doesn't he put that theory to the test? Call for a general election and let the people decide.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable lady's just proved my point from my first answer. And now that she's taken an interest in the fishing industry, which I wasn't previously aware of, I do hope that she will be signing the Scottish Fishermen's Federation pledge in relation to what should now happen in relation to fishing. I didn't know what Scottish Labour's position was on this issue. I mean, I don't suspect many other people do, but it shouldn't surprise us that ultimately it's being Nicola's little helpers to vote for a no-deal Brexit.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through city and growth deals, the UK government has already committed over £1 billion of investment to Scotland and is working on further growth deals for Borderlands, Ayrshire and Moray. The UK government is committed to delivering a city and growth deal for every part of Scotland. And these deals show the benefits that are delivered to the economy when Scotland's two governments work together.
Chris Davies.
Can I thank the Minister for his answer, and can I also welcome my honourable friend to his place? The UK government has now invested over £1.1 billion into city deals across Scotland. Does my honourable friend agree that this is the Conservatives delivering for Scotland?
I thank my honourable friend for his very warm words of welcome. I completely agree. The over £1 billion of investment in Scotland's cities shows that this government has a clear role in delivering economic growth in Scotland. And just last week, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, was in Perth announcing £150 million worth of investment as part of the Tay-Sissy's deal. And I know that honourable members for Angus and Oakhill and South Perthshire were instrumental in not just securing investment for their constituencies, but also for the whole region as part of the deal.
Sorry to be unkind, but the Minister's too long. We've got a lot to get through. Chris Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, given the recent news from Michelin, which will lose up to 850 jobs in Dundee, It's now more important than ever all commitments on the Tay-City deal are met. The Scottish Government is committed to £200 million. Can the UK Government today give a guarantee that they'll fully match that £200 million investment?
Well, the honourable member is absolutely right to raise this issue. I know how important it is to his constituency. But as I said previously, there is £150 million being committed to the region in a growth deal, and we're actively working with the Scottish Government in the Michelin Action Group, which met on the 12th of November. And with support from BEIS, we've presented a number of potential areas for further exploration for repurposing the site, either with Michelin or with another third party. And I understand that the next meeting of the Action Group is on the 30th of November.
Daniel Rowley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. £120 million was announced as part of the Edinburgh City deal to upgrade Sheriff Hall roundabout, but the A720 City bypass, which stems off of the roundabout, is chock-a-block, start to end, every day, which will affect my constituent and the Secretary of State's constituents. But it seems to have slipped down the agenda for the Scottish Government. Those constituents would like to know what conversations the Secretary of State has had with the government ministers in Scotland.
I thank the honourable lady for her question. I know the deal for Edinburgh was signed on the 7th of August this month. It is a £300 million investment from this government. I know how important it is for her constituency. I will ask my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, to follow up on the question so you've got some more detail.
John Lamont.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, fishing is of totemic importance in Scotland, and I meet regularly with representatives of the fishing industry in Scotland to discuss the opportunities for the sector when we leave the EU.
John Lamont.
As we've heard already this morning, the Scottish Fishermen's Federation has launched a campaign calling on all parties to back their pledge for the UK to take back control of our waters after we leave the European Union. I'm pleased the Secretary of State has signed that pledge. I've signed that pledge. Scottish Conservatives are signing that pledge. And does he agree with me that all parties in this House should sign that pledge?
I absolutely do, because when people stand up and say that they're speaking up for the fishing industry, they need to back it up, and this pledge does exactly that. So I look forward to all 59 of Scotland's MPs signing that pledge.
Oh, there's quite a lot of noise in the chamber, but I do want to be able to hear the ordinarily distinctive burr of the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for Orkney and Shetland, Mr. Alistair Carmichael.
Why did the government ever think it would be a good idea to include fisheries in the transitional arrangements?
The transitional arrangements, as the honourable gentleman knows, are a period where things will remain as they are to provide certainty. But there is a clear mechanism for fishing leaving those transitional arrangements and being part of the Fisheries Council in December 2020 to plan ahead for 2021.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited Atlantic Canada on a trade envoy visit where I met with Canadian fisheries and ocean tech companies who are invested in Scotland. They're enthusiastic to work more closely with the UK once we've left the common fisheries policy to ensure that we have a better balanced and managed fisheries. Can my honourable friend give me a commitment that we will do just that?
Excellent.
I'm certainly able to give him a commitment in both regards, both to looking to work with important partners like Canada and to leave the common fisheries policy.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister claims that the Scottish fishermen should rest easy because he has signed the Scottish Fishermen's Pledge. A month ago, he signed a letter to the Prime Minister saying he would resign if Northern Ireland was treated differently from Scotland because of the threat to Scotland. If he hasn't lived up to his resignation promise, how can the Scottish fishermen ever believe that he'll live up to the promise he made in the Fishermen's Pledge?
I respect the honourable gentleman's point of view, but I believe the biggest threat to the integrity of the United Kingdom are on those benches and by people who are seeking to bring about a no-deal Brexit. A no-deal Brexit is the most certain way to see Scotland leave the United Kingdom, and I'm not going to support anything that brings that about.
Mr Speaker, the Secretary of State claims that this deal is a good deal, but on fishing, that claim was blown out of the water by President Macron of France before the ink was dry on the political declaration. The reality is that the Secretary of State cannot guarantee that the UK won't be pushed into the backstop indefinitely if access to waters and quota shares are not agreed with the European Union. That's an undeniable breach of his red line. He promised to resign over that very issue, and yet he's still here desperately claiming it's a false choice between the no deal and a bad deal. When did he realise that he cared more about his ministerial merc than a good deal for Scotland's fishermen?
Well, again, I do welcome the honourable gentleman's interest in fishing for the first time. Firstly, if he listened to fishermen, he would find that Bertie Armstrong, the Chief Executive of the Scottish Fishermen Federation, said that no red lines had been crossed. But what I find even more concerning, Mr Speaker, in all these debates on fishing, where is Scottish Labour lining up? They're lining up with President Macron to do down this country. Our Prime Minister is fighting for the best possible deal for our fishermen.
Order. There's a lot of noise in the chamber, but I want to hear the voice of Erewash. Maggie 3.